Hey there, Heather, ho there. It's Jeff Cutter Diamond welcoming you to yet another Cutter Top 10. But it's not a top 10, it's a top 15. And we're doing the NHL second round stuff as we get through to the conference semifinals and all that. We're down to 8 teams, and now we have for you 15 of the greatest overtime goals in the in that this round of the playoffs. Of course, rocking the Toronto Maple Leafs thing. So yeah, the turtle. I know it's a turtleneck, whatever. So anyway, we're gonna take a look at 15 of the greatest overtime goals of all time in the second round only, like we did in the first round. All right, so weird numbers, of course, for 15 to 11. All right, so number 15 is Corey Perry, Ducks Oilers 2017. So what ended up happening is that the Ducks and Oilers were battling each other. The Oilers had taken care of the Sharks. The Ducks took care of, I can't remember who they took care of. I think the Shark, I don't know. Like, oh yeah, the Flames. But anyway, the Ducks and Oilers rallied in game number 5 in Anaheim. It was a tight series. Unfortunately, though, it was controversial as a sort of what they call a cherry picking moment happened for Corey Perry as he kind of cherry picked the goalie. So the puck did go in the net, and the Ducks did beat the Oilers and won that series in 7. But I mean, that was just brutal what Corey Perry did, and it was kind of controversial. Number 14 is Chris Chelios scoring back-to-back overtime goals to sink the Canucks in 1995. Chris Chelios was a great defenseman for the Habs, and then they traded him to his hometown of Chicago for Danny Savard. Montreal got Danny Savard 10 years too late. But it worked out. Chelios was a serviceable defenseman for the Blackhawks. Didn't win the Stanley Cup with the Hawks, but he still was good. And in 1995, he proved how good of a sniper he was. Against the Vancouver Canucks in the what they call the conference semifinals. Of course, the old system of 1-8, and then they reseed and all that. The Blackhawks would take on the Canucks. Blackhawks took care of those pesky Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Canucks took care of the Blues in the first round. But yeah, Blackhawks were up 2-9. Chris Chelios put up not one but 2 overtime goals against Kirk McLean, and those were the final 2 games played at Pacific Coliseum in Vancouver because everyone knows about Rogers Arena in Vancouver, but did you know that that was not their main arena? It was actually the Pacific Coliseum from 1970 to 1995. So they closed down. So Chelios closed down that rink, and then of course Rogers Arena came through. Number 13 is Brad Park, another defenseman. Bruins Sabres 83. So this is back in the old days where we would have the division finals to decide who gets in. So it would be basically the Smythe division winner against the North division winner, and then it was the Adams division versus the Patrick division. Anyway, in 1983, the Adams division finals saw the Bruins took in the Sabres. It was a tough 7-game series. Buffalo had a few chances, but then all of a sudden, Buffalo was scrambling in the defensive zone, and then with goalie Bob Sauve kind of out of his net, Brad Park found the puck, slapped it past him, and the Bruins were going to the Final Four, which was an amazing overtime winner to win Game 7. Of course, this would be huge because the Bruins would fall to those pesky New York Islanders in 6 games and lose the conference finals. Number 12 is Evgeny Kuznetsov, 2018 Caps Pens. It doesn't have to be like an overtime series winner to be big. It just has to be normally big. Anyway, Kuznetsov was pretty good. And the Caps kept missing on the playoffs. 98, they went to the conference finals and had never been to the conference finals since then. They kept falling at that big hurdle, the division finals. They would take on the Pens, who basically owned them the past few years, and then went to Game 6, and then Washington went on a 2-1 break when Kuznetsov got in. The Penguins player kind of defenseman tried to throw his stick in a sense, but Kuznetsov was not phased and scored the goal. And basically, the Caps finally broke their 20-year drought and got to the conference finals, where they won it and won the cup. So they finally got rid of the Penguins once for all. Ovechkin got Crosby's number. Number 11 is Martin Gelinas, 2004 Flames. Martin Gelinas was known for his overtime heroics. I think he scored one in the 90s with the Oilers. Can't remember. But anyway, yeah, Martin Gelinas was a decent player and all that. Did you know that he was traded from the Kings to the Oilers in the Gretzky deal? Bet you didn't know that, but yeah. He was there. He played for the Oilers, part of the kid line, and then all of a sudden he was okay. He was serviceable, but he wasn't the big boy. Till 2002, when he scored the overtime goal to sink the Leafs in the conference finals and give the Carolina Hurricanes a trip to the final. However, Jonah would prove himself worthy. I don't think I had him in my top 15 first round overtime goals, but Jonah scored a huge Game 7 overtime goal in Vancouver against the Canucks, who were shorthanded because Todd Bertuzzi's stupidity on the whole Steve Moore thing. Yeah, you want to protect your teammate, but you went overboard. That's why the Canucks fell flat on their ass. So anyway, Martin Jelena would provide it again against the Red Wings. The Red Wings were expected to roll over Calgary in the conference semis, but Jelena and Calgary went through. They won a game in overtime in Detroit, and then the puck was in front of the net at 0-0 with under a minute left in the first overtime. It was right to Jelena. No one picked up him, and he scored an easy tap in, and the Flames beat the Red Wings, got to the conference finals, beat the Sharks, and then went on to the Stanley Cup finals. What was weird because, Jelena scored the overtime goal for Calgary in the first round. He scored the overtime goal in the second round. He scored the game-winning goal against the Sharks to get the Flames to the Stanley Cup finals. And technically, he could have scored the cup winner in Game 6 because that puck was over the line. It was kind of weird that ABC showed it over the line and CBC didn't, of all things. Number 10 is Wayne Gretzky, 1988 Oilers Flames. Everyone remembers that. It's one of the best moments in Oilers Flames history. Of course, we all know about the Steve Smith thing, second round thing. But the fact of the matter was that Wayne Gretzky and co. were just producing and all that. And, Gretzky in game 1 in Calgary, who somehow scored more points than Edmonton and got to host the division final. Gretzky came in on the left side, snapped a 40-foot shot that went over Mike Vernon's shoulder and into the net. It was just unbelievable how picture perfect that shot had to be. Oilers went on to win the Stanley Cup that year. Number 9 is Claude Lemieux, 1986 against the Hartford Whalers. So the Habs were decent in 1986. This, of course, was Patrick Roy's rookie campaign, in which he came out of nowhere to steal the top spot from Steve Penny and Doug Soltart. The Habs swept the Boston Bruins in the first round. The Whalers shocked everyone by beating the Nordiques in the first round. The Nordiques were the top team in the Adams division, but the Whalers swept the Nordiques and set up Whalers Habs. In fact, this was the only time the Whalers won a playoff series well in Hartford. It would take till 2002 when they beat the Devils to finally have the franchise's second series win. That's how pathetic it was for Carolina. Of course, Carolina nowadays, they were good. Anyway, so Habs and Whalers went to a 6-game battle royal. The Habs were tied 1-1 in Game 7 in double overtime, and Claude Lemieux came out front, bumped Mike Leo and the glove, but then Lemieux came back out, scored under Leo's pad, and Montreal went into ruckus, cheers, and all that. For context, if you watch the French language broadcast with Richard Gurneau and a injured Mario Tremblay, yes, that Mario Tremblay, who was injured and was doing color commentating for the French network, Mario Lemieux went nuts. Mario Tremblay went nuts, forgetting he was supposed to be impartial. Just saying. Sorry about the dogs barking in the background. Number 8, Ronnie Francis, 1992 Penguins Rangers. This wasn't really an overtime goal to end a series, but this was huge. So the Penguins would take on the Rangers. Penguins actually were down 3-1. Washington had to fight off them to get to the division finals. The Rangers, who were the President's Trophy winners, or in Leavitt's terms, the best team in the regular season by points, looked good in their first round series against the Devils, although it went to 7 games. So the Penguins took on the Rangers in the division finals, in the Patrick finals, and it was 1-1. That series would be controversial for Adam Graves getting an 8-game suspension, or was it 4-game suspension? Getting a suspension for chopping Mario Lemieux, even though Mario Lemieux seemed to be fine. Lemieux basically cried crocodile tears and all that, and the league, trying to protect Mario Lemieux, basically put the hammer down on Graves. Nevertheless, Game 3, or was it 4? Well, no, it was Game 4 because the Rangers won Game 3 to go up 2-1, and then in Game 4, out of freaking nowhere, Ron Francis actually hit a 50-foot slap shot that actually handcuffed Mike Richter, forcing Van Beesbrook to come in the net for the Rangers, and then Francis scored to win the game 6-5. And strange as it sounded, the Penguins did not lose again for the rest of the playoff run. They were down 2-1 to the Rangers. They won 3 games against them, and then they swept the Bruins and then swept the Blackhawks. So that's 11 straight wins. Yeah, and that ruined the Rangers for a few years. Number 7, Dougie Gilmour, Leafs Blues 93. So this, of course, also was not an overtime goal to win a series. But anyway, Doug Gilmour did his best. And in 93, the Leafs had to go to a Game 7 in Detroit and got an unbelievable tipping goal by Nikolai Borshevsky to take care of the Rangers, the Red Wings. The Blues would actually shock the Blackhawks in the first round because the Blackhawks looked pretty good to go back to the Stanley Cup Finals. That was a massive shock the Blues did to the Blackhawks. Anyhow, the Leafs took on the Bruins. The Blues. I'm losing my head here. Nevertheless, Leafs and Blues would play each other. In Game 1, it actually went to double overtime. And strange as it sounded, the Leafs, the last game they played, went to overtime, and the Blues as well. But in double overtime, Doug Gilmour, who used to play for the Blues back in the 1980s, did you not know that? Actually came in. He was behind the net. He was looking for a wraparound. Curtis Joseph, future Leaf, would actually be watching the net, but then Gilmour faked out Cujo and slid it into the one side, and of course the camera's shaking. Of course, they had to raise the cameras high because the fans jumped in front of the camera and all that. But anyway, yeah, it was big, and of course Bob Coles go Gilmour solo job, and they won it. And double overtime. How about that? That was a huge one. Now, the Blues did win in double overtime in Game 2 on a Jeff Brown goal, but the Leafs beat the Blues in Game 7, home alone. Number 6, Peter Stastny, 1985 against the Habs. So, there's no love lost between Quebec and Montreal when they were playing each other, the Nordiques and the Habs. Of course, in 1984, the year prior, they were in that Good Friday Day brawl, a.k.a. the Bâtisse de Saint Vendredi, in which basically the officials, like Bruce Hood and the rest of the officials, screwed up royally, not telling the teams who was being thrown out of the game after the melee after the second period ended. And then there was a melee before the third period that basically everyone was there. A lot of players did get the boot, but they didn't tell them. Nevertheless, Nordiques Habs in 1985 went to Game 7. Bo Berglund, remember the name? He scored a goal for the Nordiques in Montreal. So it was down to Game 7 in overtime. Unfortunately, Steve Petty gave up a bad rebound, and Peter Stastny slipped it past him into the net. And the Nordiques were the Adams Division champs. They were going to the conference finals against the Flyers. They had a chance to take care of those Flyers, but no, Sacramento Blue. It did not happen. Number 5, Larry Robinson, 1979 Habs Leafs. Kitchener! And no, it's not top 5 because he's a Kitchener Ranger. It's because of the fact that it was a decent goal. So anyway, Habs and Leafs are massive rivals and all that. Everyone says, oh, it's the Bruins and Habs. Well, playoff format, yeah, but Leafs and Habs were always great rivals. 1978, the year before, they actually met in the Stanley Cup semifinals. Did you not realize the Leafs went to the Stanley Cup semifinals in 1978? I don't maybe you didn't know, but we'll talk about that a little later. Anywho, Habs and Leafs in 1979 were big. Habs won on a double overtime goal by Cam Connor, which kind of twisted Mike Palmateer into a pretzel. Palmateer could not play Game 4, so they had to use Gordon McRae for Game 4 against the legendary Ken Dryden. But the Leafs took the Habs to overtime. Unfortunately, a controversial penalty on Tiger Williams in overtime had given the Habs the overtime chance, and near the end of that power play, Larry Robinson, number 19, slapped the puck over McRae's shoulder. Habs won the game. They swept the Leafs. They were going to the conference finals against those pesky Boston Bruins. Well, sorry, the NHL semifinals, if you will, against the Boston Bruins. And Tiger Williams went nuts. He wanted to hurt Bob Myers so badly. But a goal's a goal. Speaking of 1978, number 4 was Lanny McDonald against the Islanders for the Leafs. Now the Leafs were really in trouble. They had not won a, they had not done well since 1967. They've won a few playoff series, well, the preliminary rounds. And anyway, the Leafs would take on the Islanders, who, after coming into the league in 1972, were starting to get their way going. The Islanders would use Al Arbor and Bill Torrey to do their job, and also just draft quietly. I mean, the Islanders were offered 5 players by the Habitants for Dennis Potvin services. They told him to go suck a you know what. Nevertheless, Lanny McDonald was an icon for the Leafs. Leafs and Isles, every game was won by the home team. Mike Bossy was harassed and hurt and all that. But in game 7, it was 1-1 headed to overtime, in which Trevor Johansson flipped a wide pass. Lanny McDonald got it before the blue line and skated it on Chico Resch and scored on Chico Resch, making the Leafs the quarterfinal winner, forcing them to take on the Habs in the semifinals. Although they got swept, they got to the Final Four, and it was an amazing moment. And of course, Dan Kelly's call was pretty good too. So yeah, Lanny McDonald helping the Leafs out was just amazing. And to boot, he had to wear a full face shield after an injury. Number 3, Stevie Y, 1996 Red Wings Blues. So the 96 Red Wings won 62 games to break the record set by the 1977 Habs for most wins in the season. They did have an easy time in the first round against, well, they didn't really have an easy time against Winnipeg in the first round. The Jets won a couple games, and Finley lost Game 6 on home ice. That was the end of the franchise. You know, you got to celebrate in front of your home fans. St. Louis had to take care of Toronto, even though that Grant Fuhr was bowled over by Nick Kypreos, and John Casey, former icon of the North Stars in 1991, would have to be in net for the Blues. The Blues played Detroit tough. It was six games, 3-3, going to Game 7 on home turf in front of the ESPN cameras. Well, of course, CBC with Bob Cole and Harry Neal. But anyway, it was no score, double overtime. Gretzky had the puck with. Remember, he did play for the Blues at one time. The Kings traded him to the Blues for the 96 playoff drive. Anyway, Gretzky lost the puck, and the Yzerman streaked in and then unloaded a 60-foot slap shot that eluded John Casey, put the puck at the back of the net, and made Detroit go bonkers. It was just amazing. Like 60-foot shot by Steve Yzerman to win the series in the second round. Red Wings would lose to the Avalanche in the conference finals, but still, that's huge. Number 2 is Keith Primo, 2000 Flyers versus Pittsburgh. So the Flyers, Penguins, no love lost. And of course, you know, they had the first round playoff series this year. But the fact of the matter is that Keith Primo had one of the best Flyers Penguins playoff moments of all time. The Flyers actually were down 2-0 to the Penguins, won Game 3 on an Andy Dalmore goal in overtime. And then Game 4 went on and on and on and on. It landed into the 5th overtime, the longest modern overtime game of all time. There were 2 games above them for minutes played, and it was actually Mud Brunetro and Ken Doherty scoring goals in 1936 and 1933, respectively. But Keith Primo's goal was amazing. So it was in the 5th overtime. Steve Levy and Darren Pang for ESPN were just tired. Chris Cuthbert, and I don't know who the color commentator was who did the game of Cuthbert. But anyway, yeah, it was Flyers Penguins, and then Keith Primo cut it, and he cut it and made a perfect shot, beating Ron Tugnutt, who was with the Penguins at the time. It was amazing. And of course, Steve Levy's shot call. Primo cuts the back, score! There it is! Keith Primo, the much beloved Flyer centerman, has scored the overtime winner. So it was just amazing to see Keith Primo just, you know, he had wheels. And, you know, Keith Primo was criticized for his performance as the Flyers center, and I think captain at one point. But yeah, Keith Primo scored the goal. Flyers tied the series with the Penguins, won that series, I think, in 6. And then the Flyers took on the Devils in the 2000 conference finals and lost Game 7 after being up 3-1. And finally, number one, without a fact, is one of the most famous overtime goals that led to a massive upset. It's 1993. It's the Islanders Penguins. Anyway, the Islanders took care of Washington, winning 3 straight overtime games. And yes, that was the series in which Dale Hunter and the Caps went bonkers, hurting Pierre Turgeon after he scored a goal. It was just like, what the hell, Dale Hunter? And you knew he was mad because Turgeon lifted his arm up and then Hunter whacked at him. Dale Hunter would get a 21-game suspension for his actions, and rightfully so. The Penguins had no problems with the Devils, so it was Islanders Penguins. But somehow, some way, those plucky New York Islanders, with Al Arbor back behind the bench, shocked the Penguins by forcing them to Game 7. It was the fault of one Darius Kasparaitis, who basically whacked Lemieux, trying to knock him down, and kind of forcing Lemieux to take a 1-year hiatus in 1994-95. It's ironic because Kasparaitis would actually be a hero for the Penguins. In 2001, Penguins took on the Sabres in the conference semifinals. Kasparaitis in Game 7 beat Dominik Hasek and got the Penguins to the next round. So anyway, it was others Pens Game 7. Cuthbert and uh, um, Dick Irvin Jr. were making the call because, well, they did the Habs Sabre series, but that ended in 4 straight, with the Habs winning 3 straight games by overtime. So anyway, CBC, it was all that. And Jacques Demers was watching at a TV studio in Montreal because the Habs were going to be facing either the Islanders or Penguins in the Stanley Cup semifinals. Is it going to be Lemieux versus Waugh, or is it going to be Waugh versus, Glenn Healy? Can't hate him, Glenn Healy, but whatever. But yeah, it was a tough game. Penguins were down 3-1, but scored 2 late goals to tie the game. And then Larry Murphy and Ulf Samuelsson kind of went in. Samuelsson kind of went in on a defensive moment, tried to play offense, and then he got caught. Islanders made a 2-on-1 break. Chris Cuthbert with the call. 2-on-1. Boston scores! David Fullock, Islanders! And there will be a new Stanley Cup champion in 1993. That was one of the most shocking overtime goals, much less in the second round. David Fullock, who was known for being a terrible defensive forward and a shitty skater, somehow in some way scored the winning goal to send the New York Islanders to the semifinals against the Habitants. It was like, what the hell just happened? It happened. Oy vey. But yeah, it happened. The New York Islanders sent the Pittsburgh Penguins flying. The 2-time defending Stanley Cup champs were done. And David freaking Fullock was the hero. But Montreal took care of the Islanders in 5 games, so it was right in the world, I suppose. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond at Duke.